You know that moment when you realize you've been the villain in your own love story? It took me 3 years, 2 therapy sessions, and running into my ex at a grocery store to finally understand what I'd done. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Violet Maxwell, and I need to tell you about the biggest mistake of my life. One that cost me the only man who ever truly loved me. I was 26 when I met Connor at a mutual friend's housewarming party in 2019. He was helping the host fix a broken cabinet while everyone else was getting drunk on cheap wine, which should have told me everything I needed to know about his character. Connor was the kind of guy who noticed when someone needed help and simply offered it. No fanfare required. We started dating that fall, and by winter we were inseparable. He had this quiet confidence that drew me in. Never boastful, never dramatic, just solid in a way that made me feel safe. We moved in together after 18 months, adopting a rescue dog we named Pepper and falling into a comfortable routine that felt like home. Then the pandemic hit, and like everyone else, we found ourselves trapped together in our 1-bedroom apartment. Those months should have brought us closer, but instead, they made me restless. Watching other people on social media living these seemingly adventurous lives while I was making sourdough bread and binge-watching Netflix made me feel like I was missing out on something essential. I feel like my 20s are slipping away, I told Connor one evening as we walked Pepper around our neighborhood for the 3rd time that day. We're building something good together, he replied, squeezing my hand. Isn't that worth something? At the time, I rolled my eyes. Now I'd give anything to have that conversation again. By early 2022, as the world started opening up again, I developed what I can only describe as a chronic case of FOMO. I started following travel bloggers on Instagram, reading articles about solo female adventures, and fantasizing about all the experiences I'd never had. The problem wasn't that I was unhappy with Connor. He was still the same thoughtful, reliable man I'd fallen for. The problem was that I'd convinced myself I was missing out on some crucial life experience by being in a committed relationship. I'd only had 2 serious boyfriends before Connor, both long-term relationships that started in college. I'd never been single as an adult, never had a one-night stand, never kissed a stranger in a foreign country. These felt like significant gaps in my life experience, though I couldn't articulate why they mattered so much. Maybe I should take a solo trip, I mentioned to Connor one evening over dinner. Just for a few weeks. I've never traveled alone. He looked up from his pasta, considering. That sounds great. Where were you thinking? Maybe Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. Those places always look so beautiful online. We could go together, he suggested. I've got vacation times saved up. That's not really the point, I said, feeling a flash of irritation. I want to do this alone. You know, have that independent experience. Connor nodded slowly. Okay, if that's what you want, I think you should do it. His easy agreement should have been reassuring, but instead it made me feel like he didn't care enough to protest. Looking back, I realized I was looking for problems where none existed. I spent weeks planning my trip, booking flights and accommodations for a month-long journey through Southeast Asia. Connor was supportive throughout, helping me research visa requirements and suggesting places to visit based on travel blogs he'd found. But as my departure date approached, I found myself wanting something more from him, some acknowledgement that this trip was about more than just sightseeing. The conversation that changed everything happened 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave. We were having dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant when I decided to bring up what I'd been thinking about for days. I've been wondering, I said, trying to sound casual, what you'd think about us having an open relationship while I'm traveling. Connor set down his fork and looked at me with genuine confusion. What do you mean? I mean, we could both see other people while I'm away. No strings attached, just experiences. I've never been single as an adult, and this might be my only chance to figure out what that's like without having to actually break up. The silence that followed felt endless. I watched Connor's face cycle through confusion, hurt, and something that looked like disappointment. You want to sleep with other people, he said finally. It's not about wanting to, I said, though that wasn't entirely true. It's about freedom, about having experiences I've never had. and it would go both ways. You could do whatever you wanted to. I don't want to do whatever I want with other people, Connor said quietly. I want to be with you. His sincerity should have melted my heart, but instead it frustrated me. That's not the point. The point is that we'd both be free to explore without it threatening what we have. But it would threaten what we have, he said, at least for me. We argued for over an hour. I kept trying to explain that this wasn't about our relationship being lacking, but about me needing to experience independence. Connor kept trying to understand why I needed to be with other people to feel independent. Neither of us was really hearing the other. This feels like you're asking me to give you permission to cheat, he said eventually. It's not cheating if we both agree to it, I replied, annoyed that he was being so black and white about everything. For me it is, Connor said. I can't separate physical intimacy from emotional connection the way you're suggesting. If you want to be with other people, maybe we should break up. That's not what I want, I said quickly. I want both. I want to have these experiences and still come home to you. Connor shook his head. That's not how love works, Violet. At least not for me. Over the next week, I kept bringing up the topic, convinced I could make Connor understand if I just explained it correctly. I found articles about successful open relationships and sent them to him. I talked to my friend Sarah, who'd had casual relationships throughout her 20s, and shared her perspective with Connor. Sarah says it's completely normal to want experiences outside a relationship, I told him one evening. Sarah's never been in a committed relationship longer than 6 months, Connor replied dryly. That doesn't invalidate her point, Connor sighed. Look, I've thought about what you're asking, and I understand why you might want these experiences, but I can't be okay with it. It would change how I see us, how I see you. I'd rather you go on your trip as my girlfriend or not at all. His ultimatum made me furious. So you're saying I can't explore who I am outside this relationship? You can explore who you are, he said, just not with other men. That's controlling, I shot back. It's having boundaries, Connor replied. And if that makes me controlling, then maybe we're not as compatible as I thought. The night before my departure, I made one last attempt. I apologized for pressuring him, said I understood his position, and promised to be faithful during my trip. Connor hugged me tight and said he was proud of me for taking this journey. I'll miss you every day, he said. I'll miss you too, I replied, meaning it. But even as I said the words, part of me was already planning to do exactly what I wanted, once I was far enough away that it wouldn't matter. My first week in Bangkok was everything I'd imagined solo travel would be. I stayed in a trendy hostel in the backpacker district, met other travelers from around the world, and felt truly independent for the first time in my adult life. I video called Connor every evening, sharing stories about temples I'd visited and street food I'd tried. You sound happy, he said during one of our calls. I am, I replied, and it was true. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The first test came on my 5th night, when a British guy named Oliver invited me to join his group for drinks. Oliver was charming and funny, exactly the type of person I might have been attracted to in different circumstances. When he suggested we ditch the group and explore Bangkok's nightlife together, I almost said yes. Instead, I politely declined and returned to my hostel to call Connor. I'm proud of you, Connor said when I told him about turning down Oliver's invitation, but his pride felt like pressure. I hadn't turned Oliver down because I wanted to be faithful. I turned him down because I was afraid of getting caught. In Siem Reap, I met Elena, a Spanish photographer traveling alone for 6 months. Elena was everything I thought I wanted to be. Confident, adventurous, unattached. She'd had romantic encounters in every country she'd visited and spoke about them with casual ease. Travel romances are the best, she told me over drinks one evening. No expectations, no complications, just pure experience. What about relationships back home, I asked. Elena shrugged. I don't do long-distance relationships, too limiting. When Elena invited me to join her at a party hosted by some local artists, I said yes. The party was everything I'd imagined when I'd fantasized about my solo adventure. Creative people from around the world, music, dancing, and an energy that felt electric after the quiet routine of my life with Connor. That's where I met Matteo, an Italian musician traveling through Southeast Asia. He was magnetic in the way that only really dangerous men can be. Not dangerous physically, but dangerous to the carefully constructed life I'd built back home. When Matteo asked if I wanted to see his favorite spot in the city, I said yes without hesitation. When he kissed me under the stars at an ancient temple, I kissed him back. And when he invited me back to his guest house, I went. Lying in Matteo's bed afterward, I felt a complex mix of exhilaration and guilt. The exhilaration won. This was exactly what I'd wanted. The experience of being desired by someone new, the thrill of spontaneity, the feeling of being completely free. I told myself it didn't count. It was just physical, meaningless, the kind of experience everyone should have at least once. Connor would never know, and what he didn't know couldn't hurt him. When Connor called the next evening, I was cheerful and chatty, sharing carefully edited stories about my day. I'd become an expert at telling the truth without revealing anything important. "How was the temple tour?" he asked. "Amazing," I said. "Really spiritual experience." I wasn't technically lying. In Ho Chi Minh City, I met Jake, an Australian teacher on his gap year. Jake was different from Matteo, sweeter, more thoughtful, the kind of guy I might actually date in real life. That should have been a warning sign, but instead it felt like validation. If someone like Jake was interested in me, maybe I was more desirable than I'd thought. I spent 3 days with Jake, and not all of it was physical. We talked for hours about books and movies and life goals. He was the kind of person who actually listened when I spoke, who asked follow-up questions, who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts. On our last night together, Jake asked if I had a boyfriend back home. "It's complicated," I said, which felt like the truth. "Most good things are," Jake replied. When we said goodbye at the airport, Jake asked for my contact information. I gave it to him, knowing I shouldn't, but unable to resist the attention. "Maybe I'll visit you in the States sometime," he said. "Maybe," I replied, already planning to block his number once I was home. 2 weeks before I was supposed to return home, Connor surprised me with a video call while I was having breakfast at a cafe in Hanoi. I'd been expecting his usual evening call, so seeing his name pop up mid-morning caught me off guard. "Hey, beautiful," he said when I answered. "I know it's your morning, but I couldn't sleep and wanted to see your face." The genuine affection in his voice made my chest tight with guilt. Behind him, I could see our apartment, our couch, our bookshelf, our life together. It looked smaller on the screen than I remembered, but also more precious. "How's Vietnam treating you?" Connor asked. "It's incredible," I said, which was true. "The people are amazing, the food is unreal, and I'm learning so much about myself." "I can see it in your face," Connor said. "You look different, more confident." If only he knew why. We talked for 20 minutes about my travels, his work, and our dog Pepper, who apparently missed me terribly. As we were about to hang up, Connor said something that made my blood run cold. "I've been thinking about what you said before you left," he said, "about wanting experiences and freedom. I still don't agree with your solution, but I understand better now why it mattered to you. I'm proud of you for taking this trip and discovering who you are outside our relationship." The trust in his voice, the way he was trying to support something he didn't fully understand, made me feel sick. This man loved me enough to let me go halfway around the world alone, and I was repaying that trust by doing exactly what he'd asked me not to do. After we hung up, I sat in that cafe for 2 hours, staring at my reflection in the black screen of my phone. My last week in Thailand passed in a blur of temples, beaches, and guilt. I turned down several opportunities for romantic encounters, not out of renewed faithfulness, but because the excitement had drained out of the whole enterprise. What had felt like liberation now felt like betrayal. On the plane home, I made a decision. I would never tell Connor what had happened. It would be my secret burden, my private shame. We'd go back to our life together, and I'd be a better girlfriend because I'd gotten this wanderlust out of my system. Connor was waiting for me at the airport with flowers and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. When he hugged me, I started crying, not from joy, but from relief and guilt and love all tangled together. "I missed you so much," he said. "I missed you too," I replied, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. For the first few weeks back home, everything seemed perfect. I was attentive and affectionate, grateful to be back in Connor's arms. I cooked his favorite meals, suggested weekend trips, and threw myself into rebuilding our relationship with the energy of someone trying to atone for unspoken sins. Connor noticed the change. "Travel really did you good," he said one evening as we cuddled on our couch. "You seem more present somehow." If only he knew I was present because I was terrified of losing what we had. 3 months after my return, Jake texted me. Just a simple message asking how I was doing, but it sent me into a panic. I'd never blocked his number, telling myself I'd forgotten, but knowing I'd kept that door slightly ajar on purpose. I deleted the message without responding, but it had already done its damage. Suddenly, I was thinking about Vietnam again. About those 3 days with Jake, when I'd felt desired and interesting and free. The guilt I'd been carrying transformed into something more dangerous, nostalgia. When Jake texted again a week later, I responded, just briefly, just to be polite. He was planning a trip to the US, he said. Maybe we could get coffee when he was in town. I told him I was in a relationship now, which felt like the truth even though nothing had technically changed. Jake said he understood. Just wanted to catch up as friends. What could be wrong with that? Connor found Jake's messages 2 weeks later, purely by accident. I'd left my phone on the kitchen counter while showering, and it had buzzed with a notification. Connor glanced at it reflexively, the way you do with your partner's phone, and saw Jake's name and the preview of a message about his upcoming visit. I came out of the bathroom to find Connor sitting on our bed, holding my phone with an expression I'd never seen before. "Who's Jake?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us like a blade. I could have told the truth then, could have confessed everything and thrown myself on his mercy. Instead, I doubled down on deception. "Just someone I met traveling," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. "He's visiting the States and wanted to get coffee." I told him I was in a relationship. Connor looked at me for a long moment. "Can I see your phone?" "Why?" I asked, immediately defensive. "Because something feels off," Connor said. "The way you're acting, the way you answered. I just want to understand." "You don't trust me?" I asked, turning it back on him. "I want to," Connor said. "But you're asking me to trust you while refusing to show me why I should." We stared at each other across our bedroom. Two people who'd shared a bed for 3 years, but suddenly felt like strangers. Finally, I handed him my phone, knowing I was trapped, but hoping the evidence wouldn't be as damning as I feared. Connor read through my conversation with Jake in silence. It wasn't explicitly romantic, but the subtext was clear to anyone who knew how to read it. The casual intimacy, the inside references, the way Jake mentioned things we'd done together that I'd never told Connor about. "You spent 3 days with him," Connor said finally. "We were both traveling alone. We hung out. You never mentioned him." "I hung out with lots of people. I can't tell you about everyone I met." Connor set my phone down carefully on the nightstand. "Did you sleep with him?" The question I'd been dreading for months, asked so simply and directly that I almost answered honestly. Instead, I lied. "No," I said. "We were just friends." Connor studied my face for what felt like an eternity. Then he nodded and handed me back my phone. "Okay," he said. "I believe you." But I could see in his eyes that he didn't. Not really. And I could see something else, a kind of sadness, like he was mourning something that had already died. Over the next few weeks, Connor became distant in a way that felt different from anger or hurt. He was polite, functional, but the warmth had gone out of his interactions with me. He stopped suggesting weekend plans, stopped reaching for me in bed, stopped sharing the small details of his day, that had always been the foundation of our connection. I told myself he was being paranoid, that his suspicion was unfair. But deep down, I knew he was protecting himself from a truth he could sense but couldn't prove. The end came on a Tuesday evening in November. I was making dinner when Connor's phone rang. He answered it in the living room, and I heard him say, "Yes, this is Connor. How did you get this number?" Something in his tone made me turn off the stove and move closer to the door. "Elena," I heard him say, and my blood turned to ice. "From Cambodia. Right, Elena. The Spanish photographer who'd been with me the night I met Mateo. The one who'd encouraged me to live freely, to have experiences without guilt. The one who'd somehow gotten Connor's number and decided to call him." I couldn't hear her side of the conversation, but I could piece together Connor's responses. "She never mentioned you," he said. Then, after a pause, "A party with artists, I see." Another pause, longer this time. "Mateo," Connor repeated, and I knew everything was over. I walked back to the kitchen on unsteady legs and sat down at our table. Through the doorway, I could see Connor pacing in the living room, his free hand running through his hair the way it did when he was trying to process something difficult. The conversation lasted maybe 10 more minutes. When Connor hung up, the silence in our apartment felt absolute. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, phone still in his hand, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something colder. Recognition. "Elena says hello," he said. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "She wanted to apologize," Connor continued. "Apparently, she's been feeling guilty about encouraging you to cheat on me. She thought I deserved to know." "Connor." "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many people were there?" I could have kept lying, could have claimed Elena was confused, that she'd misunderstood something, that this was all a misunderstanding. But looking at Connor's face, I knew the deception was over. "Two," I whispered. Connor nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away. "The whole time?" "Not the whole time," I said quickly. "Just it wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't about you." "What was it about?" Connor asked. "Freedom," I said, the words sounding hollow and stupid in our kitchen. "Experience. I'd never been single as an adult, and I thought—" "You thought you could have both," Connor finished. "Yes. You thought you could lie to me for months, and it wouldn't matter because I didn't know. It didn't mean anything," I said desperately. "They were just experiences. You're the one I love. You're the one I came home to." Connor was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor between us. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I would have let you go," he said softly. "If you'd told me you needed to be single, I would have been heartbroken, but I would have let you go. Instead, you made me into a fool." "You're not a fool." "I am," Connor said. "I'm a fool who spent 3 months missing someone who was busy forgetting I existed. I'm a fool who believed you when you said it was just about independence. I'm a fool who thought love meant something to you," and the pain in his voice broke something in me. "It does mean something. You mean everything to me." "No," Connor said, shaking his head. "I mean security to you. I mean safety. But I don't mean enough to be faithful to, and I don't mean enough to be honest with." Connor moved out 3 days later. He didn't take much, just his clothes, his books, and the few things that were clearly his. He left our shared belongings, our furniture, our photos. He even left Pepper, saying the dog was better off in familiar surroundings. "This doesn't have to be permanent," I said, as he loaded the last box into his car. "We could try counseling. We could work through this." Connor straightened up and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "I can't get past the lying, Violet. If you cheated and told me immediately, maybe we could have worked through it. But you lied to me for months. You let me believe things were good between us while knowing they weren't. I can't trust you anymore, and without trust, there's nothing to work through." He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the driveway of the life we'd built together. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life. I threw myself into work, took up yoga, tried dating apps. anything to avoid sitting alone with the magnitude of what I'd lost. Friends tried to be supportive, but their comfort felt hollow. They'd say things like, "You deserve someone who accepts all of you," or "Maybe this was meant to happen." And I'd want to scream that I didn't deserve anything, that I'd destroyed the best thing in my life for nothing. Through mutual friends, I heard that Connor was doing better. He'd gotten a promotion at work, bought a small house across town, adopted a rescue cat he named Buster. 6 months after our breakup, someone mentioned he was dating a teacher named Amy who volunteered at the animal shelter where he'd adopted Buster. The news should have devastated me, but instead, it brought a strange kind of relief. Connor was moving on, building a new life with someone who probably wouldn't lie to him for months about sleeping with strangers in foreign countries. Someone who deserved the loyalty and love I'd thrown away. 2 years later, I ran into Connor at a grocery store. He looked good, healthier somehow, more relaxed. We made small talk for a few minutes, and he mentioned that he and Amy had gotten engaged. I congratulated him and meant it. As we parted ways, Connor said something that has stayed with me ever since. "I hope you found what you were looking for," he said, not unkindly. "I did," I replied, realizing it was true. I found out what really matters. What I learned, too late to save us, was that freedom isn't about being able to do whatever you want without consequences. Real freedom is about choosing what matters and committing to it fully, even when other options present themselves. It's about being trustworthy, not just trusted. It's about understanding that love isn't a safety net that lets you take risks with other people's hearts. It's a choice you make every day to put someone else's well-being alongside your own. I'd asked for an open relationship before my solo trip. Connor had said no, so I'd called him insecure. But Connor wasn't insecure. He was clear about his values and brave enough to stick to them. I was the insecure one, so afraid of missing out on hypothetical experiences that I'd sacrificed a real, irreplaceable love. Now, when people ask me about my solo travel experience, I tell them it was educational. I learned about different cultures, tried amazing food, and discovered I could navigate foreign countries on my own. But the most important thing I learned was what I was willing to lose in pursuit of what I thought I wanted. It was a lesson that cost me everything, but I suppose some truths can only be learned the hard way. Connor found someone who deserved his loyalty, and I found out who I really was when nobody was looking. I just wish I'd figured it out in time to keep him.